If there ever has been a bigger bootlegger than Remus, the fact remains a secret. Remus was to bootlegging what Rockefeller was to oil. In the sheer imagination of his plan, in the insolent sweep of his ambition, and the power with which he swept upward toward his goal, Remus can bear comparison with the captains of industry. St. Louis Post-Dispatch.
George Remus was one of the best-known criminal attorneys in the Midwest. A self-made man, he had arrived in America with his German immigrant parents at 5. Was forced to leave school at 15 to support his family. Became a pharmacist at 19. Put himself through law school at night, and then spent 20 years as a defense attorney in Chicago. In his most celebrated case, he had tried but failed to win acquittal for a man who had murdered his wife on the then unusual grounds of temporary insanity. When Prohibition began, Remus found himself defending bootleggers in a courtroom presided over by a federal judge named Kennesaw Mountain Landis. Remus was angered at the size of the judge's arbitrary fines, but also intrigued by the ease with which his clients peeled off $1,000 bills to pay them.
I was impressed by the rapidity with which those men, without any brains at all, piled up fortunes in the liquor business. The more I studied the Volstead Act, the more I was convinced of its frailties. And so I decided to get in on the ground floor. Strike while the iron was hot.
Practicing law had already made Remus rich. Like Roy Olmsted in Seattle, he would discover that breaking the law would make him far richer. And he would do it on a scale beyond anything Olmsted could have imagined. Remus knew that millions of gallons of liquor manufactured before Prohibition were locked away in bonded distillery warehouses. If their owners could get government withdrawal permits, they could sell it legally, but only to drug companies and only if they promised to dispense it for purely medicinal purposes. By buying up distilleries and creating his own drug company, Remus could become both buyer and seller, and then cook the books to lose shipments in between. He called his system the Circle. In June of 1920, after marrying Imogene Holmes, the secretary who had broken up his first marriage, Remus left Chicago and moved to Ohio to begin a new life. He picked Cincinnati because nearly 80% of America's bonded liquor was stored in distillery warehouses within a 300-mile radius. George Remus intended to buy up as many of them as he could.
And he built this enormous octopus of a bootlegging operation. And most cleverly, he started a drug company, a wholesaler to drugstores. And then he would send his trucks out. His own men would hijack those trucks and put it into the illegal liquor trade.
Remus set up his own bogus Kentucky drug company in Covington and bought up the Fleischmann and Edgewood distilleries in Cincinnati, as well as the Pogue and Hill & Hill distilleries in Kentucky. He created his own trucking firm, the American Transportation Company, to carry whiskey to his distribution center, an isolated 50-acre Ohio farm hidden in a hollow, whose house, barns, and outhouses could hold tens of thousands of cases of whiskey. Because hired gunmen commanded every inch of the lone road that led down into it, his men liked to call the farm Death Valley. Customers ventured down and back up the road all day.
They came from all over the country and included the fashionable clubman, the hotel keeper, the whiskey jobber, the petty bootlegger. They were as anxious to buy as I was to sell, and there was never a day that the demand was not 70% greater than the supply.
Sales were strictly cash. sometimes as much as $79,000 a day, all of it tax-free. As Remus's wealth grew, so did his self-confidence, and he began to refer to himself in the third person.
Remus was in the whiskey business, and Remus was the biggest man in the business. Cincinnati was the American Mecca for good liquor, and America had to come to Remus to get it. George Remus.
Remus soon had 3,000 employees working 3 shifts a day and was doing millions of dollars worth of business a year. He bought an elegant mansion in Cincinnati's best neighborhood and filled it with beautiful things. To keep it all going, he paid off an army of local, state, and federal officials. I went on the theory that every man has a price, he said, and I could afford to pay it. But to obtain the thousands of government permits required to withdraw all of the whiskey from his own distilleries, Remus needed direct access to Washington as well. To get it, he went right to the top. In May of 1921, he checked into the Commodore Hotel in Manhattan for the first of several secret meetings with Jess Smith, friend, confidant, and fixer for President Harding's Attorney General, Harry Daugherty. Smith was blunt. Remus could have all the signed federal withdrawal permits he wanted for $2.50 per case. Smith also promised that for another $50,000, Remus could be protected from punishment. Even if he were arrested and indicted, he would never have to go to jail. Remus paid him on the spot in $1,000 bills. Over the following months, Remus would meet Smith again and again in Columbus and Indianapolis, Washington and New York, and later claimed to have paid him a total of more than $250,000 in bribes.
You must understand that I was spending much time on the road. Today, I could be in New York, opening a new drug company, conferring with certain gentlemen, if I may call them so, on matters pertaining to the conduct of our business without interference from the government. On the train between cities, I was busy studying the new prohibition regulations and devising means to circumvent them as fast as they were issued. You will pardon me for saying that it was a very strenuous life.